Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 2021 Writers Trust Rising Stars live stream. Oh, okay. Do let me know. Great. Perfect. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 2021 Writers Trust Rising Stars live stream. Thank you for joining us as we announce this year's group of stellar developing writers, poised to dazzle us with their contributions to Canadian literature for years to come. Each recipient receives $5,000, one-on-one career guidance from an established Canadian writer, and an invitation to attend a future creative writing residency at the Banff Centre for Arts and Creativity. First and foremost, I'll ask you to join us in acknowledging the land on which we gather. From wherever you are in Canada, Turtle Island is home to many Indigenous peoples who have been here for time immemorial. My own work takes place on the unceded, occupied, ancestral, and traditional lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. I commit to acknowledging the stolen lands my work takes place on, to celebrating and honoring Indigenous peoples on the West Coast. Toronto, where the Writers' Trust is based, is part of the Dish with One Spoon territory, named for a treaty between the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee and the Mississaugas of the New Credit. We extend our gratitude to the past, present, and future elders and teachers who carry the knowledge of this land. My name is Chelene Knight. I am a writer, editor, associate literary agent with Transatlantic Agency, and owner of Breathing Space Creative. I am currently working on books number 3 and 4, a novel set in Vancouver's Hogan's Alley, and also a nonfiction book on Black self-love. My previous books are Braided Skin and Dear Current Occupant. I was one of the inaugural Writers Trust Rising Stars in 2019, and my experience of being selected as a rising star was just incredible. So the most beneficial part of that experience for me was working with my selector, David Cheriandi. His open and honest insights about my work informed the shape my book holds now. So I am forever grateful for his gratitude. And to this day, he continues to hold space for me, which is just him going above and beyond. So today I'm very excited to introduce this year's selectors and reveal the 2021 Writers Trust Rising Stars recipients. So stay tuned for a group conversation on creation, craft, and pandemic writing life. So before we get started, I'd like to thank our program sponsors, Margaret Atwood, Carrie Cullen, and William Bonnell, Claire Duff in memory of Catherine Shepard, Deb McLeod, and Ward Sellers, one anonymous donor and presenting sponsor, BMO. Their generous support of Canadian literature helps ensure the next generation of Canadian stories thrive on national and international stages. Okay, and now on to the reveal. Writers Trust asked 5 established and lauded authors to each identify a developing writer to spotlight and mentor. This year's selectors are Deborah Campbell, Brian Francis, Sue Goyette, Lawrence Hill, and Katharina Vermette. Each selector has pre-recorded a short introduction sharing a few of the reasons why they were drawn to and selected their rising star. First up, we have Brian Francis. Brian is a novelist who has been nominated for a Governor General's Literary Award, and he has a new book of nonfiction that will be published this summer. He lives in Toronto.
Hi there, my name is Brian Francis, and I'm the author of 3 novels and an upcoming book called Misconnections, a memoir and letters never sent, which comes out this August with McClellan and Stewart. I am very happy to be part of the Rising Stars program, and I'm very happy to announce that my rising star that I've selected is Eddie Boudel-Tan. Eddie, I think, is a fantastic writer and is going to have a very long and prosperous career ahead of him. What I really like about Eddie is that he's not afraid of taking chances and tackling complicated stories, complicated characters, family dynamics, you name it. And also, what I love about Eddie is that his writing has so much heart and emotion behind it. And that's something for me as a writer and as a reader that I really gravitate towards. It's exciting to be with someone at the start of their career. He's just started work on his third novel, and I'm happy to be working with him on that. I think it's going to be fantastic. And I just can't wait for new readers to discover him, and I'm excited to get the opportunity to work with him as part of this program. And all I can say is congratulations, Eddie, and looking forward to the future.
Congratulations, Eddie. Welcome. I'm sure you must be so excited.
Wow, thank you so much, Chelene, and thank you to Brian. I'm blushing just hearing those words come from a writer that I've long admired. I read Brian's first novel many years ago, and it's very much inspired a lot of my work. I see a lot of parallels between his work and mine. His stories reflect the less commonly explored facets of the queer experience, the quiet side, and the quirky side. And I try to do the same with my work. So to hear Brian say those words about me and my work and to select me as his rising star truly is an honor.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Eddie. Our next selector is Lawrence Hill. Lawrence is the author of 10 books of fiction and nonfiction. He is a professor of creative writing at the University of Guelph and lives in Hamilton.
Hi, I'm Lawrence Hill, writer of the Book of Negroes and winner of the Rogers Writers Trust Fiction Prize. I selected Jamila Ibrahim as a Writers Trust Rising Star because of the range, depth, maturity, and global reach of her short stories. Jamila's debut collection, Things Are Good Now, introduces characters who are caught in turmoil, both emotional and geopolitical, in Sudan, Ethiopia, Syria, the United States, and Canada. Their struggle to gain control over their lives is sometimes advanced and at other times stymied as they move in and out of Canada. Jamila's debut is bold, ambitious, and compassionate. Readers will be enthralled by her stories and enriched for having come to empathize with her characters. What excites me about Rising Stars is that it will allow Jamila some additional profile, encouragement, and financial support. Rising Stars will also make it possible for the two of us to speak, artist to artist, about ways that Jamila might advance her own writing career. Mentorship is such a rewarding experience. It affords me the opportunity to give back a few of the many gifts that I've received over the years from other writers. My own struggles, the mistakes I've made, the lessons I've learned. All of this seems richer and more worthwhile when I can draw from my own experiences to encourage developing writers. The sort of artist I most admire is one who is not just committed to their own development, but passionate about motivating and creating opportunities for others. Some of my favorite kinds of shop talk include plot, character development, structure, dialogue, line by line techniques, and business issues relating to working with agents, editors, and publicists. I'll follow Jamila's lead and go with the issues that she most wishes to explore. At this early stage, my only advice to Jamila is to create the time and space in her life to engage with her muses. It's such a privilege and a thrill to get up in the morning for a date with a book writing project that is calling your name. Congratulations, Jamila.
Great news for Jamila Ibrahim. Unfortunately, we weren't able to tape Jamila in advance, but we want to send her a lot of love. Be sure to look out for her debut story collection, Things Are Good Now, which was shortlisted for the Danuta Glede Literary Award and translated into Italian. Jamila lives in Toronto and plans to work with Lawrence Hill on expanding her story, Heading Somewhere, into a novel. She shared that she's grateful to be selected and looks forward to focusing on the craft of writing. Congratulations again, Jamila. Now on to our next selector, Deborah Campbell. Deborah is an author of nonfiction and the recipient of 3 National Magazine Awards. She is the Director of Professional Writing at the University of Victoria.
Hi, I'm Deborah Campbell, author of A Disappearance in Damascus, which won the Hilary Weston Writers' Trust Prize for nonfiction. And I chose Carrie-Anne McGugan as a Writers' Trust Rising Star because of how moved I was by her passion for our close relatives, the primates. Her fieldwork as a primatologist has taken her into some of the most remote places on Earth, where she's brought back not only the history and culture and lives of the local people, but stories of the primates whose lives hang in the balance. Her work is an inspiration to young people embarking on tough field work anywhere. And I'm excited to work with Carrie-Anne on structure and research as she gets ready to pitch her next book. And if I was to give her one piece of advice about research, I would say that while only about 10% of the work you do ends up on the page, the other 90% is never wasted. That is the block of marble from which our stories are carved. Congratulations again, Carrie-Anne.
Kudos to you, Carrie-Anne.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is an incredible been selected for this opportunity, and I'm just so grateful to the Writers' Trust and the sponsors of this program, and especially to Deborah Campbell for gifting me this opportunity and this honor. I'm extremely excited to basically learn everything that I can from Deborah in this time period, because in reading her work, particularly Disappearance in Damascus, I really was struck by how skillfully she told that story, and just really by her craft. And so that's really what I'm most excited to learn from her, is how she approaches structure, and as she mentioned in that clip, especially research, because she is such a careful and thoughtful researcher. And so, as I approach my next project, I'm just thrilled to be able to have her in my world too. So thank you.
Wonderful. Yes. Congratulations again. Our next selector is Katharina Vermette. Katharina is a Métis novelist, poet, and author for young people. Her poetry collection, North End Love Songs, won a Governor General's Literary Award, and her first novel, The Break, was shortlisted. She lives in Winnipeg on Treaty 1 territory.
Hi, I'm Katharina Vermette, writer of A Few Things, and I have selected Amanda Peters as a Writers' Trust Rising Star. I love Amanda's work. Her stories are stunning. They are sharp. They are fully realized worlds and characters. They have this incredible range through generations, starting from 200 years ago all the way to the present day, and every character is somehow completely unique and of themselves, but also incredibly familiar. I have never been to Mi'kmaq. I am not familiar with this world that she writes in, but somehow it also feels so close to my own, and so much, there's so much to love. So I cannot wait to dig into craft and character and just talk about writing with Amanda. So again, congratulations, Amanda Peters, and I look forward to every single conversation.
Congratulations, Amanda.
Thank you. Wow. I'm very humbled to get those words from someone I admire so much. So I'm looking really forward to working with Katharina. She is going to help me on my short story collection, so that's exciting. And I just want to thank the Writers' Trust and the sponsors for everything, and I'm just looking forward to digging in.
Amazing. Congrats again. Our final Writers' Trust Rising Star selector is Sue Goyette. She has published a novel and 7 collections of poetry, including Ocean, which was a finalist for the Griffin Poetry Prize. She teaches creative writing at Dalhousie University and lives in Halifax.
Hi, I'm Sue Goyette, and I selected Rebecca Thomas as a Writers' Trust Rising Star because Rebecca's writing thrums with acuity and eloquence that illuminates and deepens our understanding of this time that we share together. I selected Rebecca so that her work reaches more people, and those people pass her work along to even more people, for how trustworthy it is, how true. I selected Rebecca because her voice is one of the voices that feels crucial, for how she names what needs to be talked about, and how, from the moment you hear it, the moment you read it, you will feel something shift. You will feel yourself change.
Congratulations on this honor, Rebecca.
Thank you so much. I want to just say Walalan to Sue for selecting me, Walaliach to the Writers' Trust for, I guess, supporting that decision, and just Walaliach to the people who read my work and who see the change and who answers the call when I put it out there. So I'm overwhelmed, and I am incredibly lucky that the stories that I tell are seen as something with merit.
Well, there you have it. These bright writers have shown great potential in their body of work so far. Congrats once again to Rebecca Thomas, Amanda Peters, Jamila Ibrahim, Carrie Ann McCougan, and Eddie Boudel Tan. To all our excited viewers, be sure to use the hashtag WTRisingStars when sharing the good news. You can also use the hashtag on Twitter to share questions for the writers, which we will get to at the end of our conversation, or post your questions right in the comments on Facebook and YouTube. Okay, so thanks everyone for joining us today. You must be very excited, and I know how you feel. My first question, let's just go ahead and start clockwise. I'm going to start with you, Eddie. What does it mean for you to be a Writers' Trust Rising Star?
Wow, well, it's a great honor, of course. And I think what it really comes down to is validation, in that as an emerging author, to be able to be recognized by such an esteemed institution like the Writers' Trust of Canada, as well as such established and respected authors like Brian Francis, my selector, it really goes a long way. And I say this as an author who doesn't have an MFA, who is a queer Asian Canadian whose parents immigrated to Canada when they were in their 20s, to be able to write work and have it read and it be recognized in this program and within the industry here in Canada is truly wonderful. So it really is a great honor.
Wonderful. Thank you, Eddie. I love what you said about validation and being seen. And I think that is huge, especially for an emerging writer just starting out. Now, I'm going to go ahead and ask you the same question, Rebecca. What does it mean for you to be a Writers' Trust Rising Star?
I think for me, it means that there is a desire to want to hear Indigenous stories from Indigenous peoples. So often our work and our stories and our histories are told by people who are not us. So being able to have an expanded platform to be able to point to our stories as truth and to be listened to and given the support through writers like Sue and through programs such as this is a shift, a tiny, tiny shift in the direction of Canada and how it feels about reconciliation with Indigenous peoples.
Thanks for that thoughtful answer. And Amanda, I'm going to go ahead and ask you the same question. What does it mean for you to be selected as a Writers Trust Rising Star?
I'm very humbled. I was very surprised when I got the call, but I think it offers a great opportunity for, like what Rebecca said, for us to tell our stories ourselves. For so long, Indigenous writers, Indigenous stories have been filtered through a colonial narrative. So it's really nice that we get to tell our own stories and that we get a platform to do that, and to be mentored by somebody so remarkable as Katerina Vermette is it's just very exciting. I'm very overwhelmed. So yes, good opportunity, good connections, networking, and new people to read.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And this is just the beginning, right? So there's just so much to look forward to. Carrie Ann, I'm going to ask you that same question. What does it mean for you to be a Writers Trust Rising Star?
Yeah, so it's an incredible honor, as everyone has mentioned. But I would echo a lot of what Eddie had to say, because as I reflect on this opportunity, I think a lot about how writing can really just be incredibly insular and solitary, like just me and my computer screen, never really knowing if anyone is going to read it or care what I wrote about. So to know that Deborah Campbell read my work and saw something in it and saw something in me as a writer, it's just incredibly meaningful and just an incredible honor.
Big part of this whole process, that idea of community and being able to work with someone closely and intimately and have this, and be able to share feedback and talk about the craft of writing and to take your time with that. I think this idea of time is something we're all thinking about now. So I'm going to ask you, I think I'm going to ask all of you this question. It's something that is close to my heart and something I think deeply about. So when it comes to working closely with your selectors, what are you most looking forward to? And I'm going to go ahead and start with you, Eddie.
Sure. You know what? You mentioned community, and I think that'd be my answer. I think I'm most looking forward to getting to know Brian, my selector. We've been meeting every Saturday morning, and I look forward to it every single week. And of course, learning from his experience, and that mentorship is so important. But I really just want to know him, and I'm really excited for he and I to now be a part of each other's community. Sort of like what Carrie Ann was saying, it can be very isolating being a writer, just me and my ideas and my screen. So to be able to connect with other writers in this way is really, really exciting.
I love that idea of wanting to get to know the person behind the writing, right? Because that's also an opportunity for you to share a little bit more about yourself with your selector. Carrie Ann, I have the same question for you. What are you looking forward to in terms of that intimate relationship that you are building with your selector?
Yeah, so it's incredibly exciting. I've never had kind of a mentor in this same way outside of my family and friends who I give everything to read. So it's nice to have that, and also to really, Deborah is just so accomplished, and as I was mentioning before, just so skillful at her craft, and so I'm just so excited to be able to be like a sponge and really learn everything that I can from her about the craft of writing. And the next book that I'm working on right now is very research heavy as well, which is a little bit of a departure from me, as my last book was a memoir. And so, being able to really learn from her how she approaches research, how she gathers information, visits archives, and how she does interviews. So all of these things are topics and that I'm really excited to dive into with her.
Exciting. That sounds amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I think I'm going to flip things around, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how the pandemic has affected your writing. I think we're all in the midst of this, just trying to figure out and situate ourselves in terms of what our craft actually looks like now. So how has the pandemic affected your writing routine or creative practice? Are you using the extra time to write, or are you finding that difficult? And I'll go ahead and start with you, Amanda.
I guess it depends on the day, really. at the beginning of the pandemic, it was still a little bit novel. So I still had some energy, and then other times it just seems a very daunting thing to do because I'm working from home. So working from one computer all day, closing it, and then opening another computer without the separation can be a little bit daunting. So I guess it just depends on the day, how much I get to go out for a walk if the sun is shining. So it's I'm not really sure if I can answer that.
Yeah, and just taking it day by day, I think that's a smart
Mhm.
move as well, and kind of feeling things out and also recognizing the things that count as writing, right? That idea of taking a walk and noticing your surroundings, all of that ties into the creative process, at least for
Yeah.
me. So I'd love to hear what you think about that, Rebecca, in terms of writing in the pandemic and how it's affected or has not affected your creative writing process.
For me, when I write a poem, I tend to write the whole thing. I'll have an idea in my head, or I have a specific line that I go, oh, this is good, and I want to turn this into a poem. And then I title it at the very end, and I always struggle with titles. I don't think I'm very good at giving my poems titles. And so what I've been doing, because I've been finding the process of writing really challenging because I can't pay attention anymore. I find it, when I'm answering work emails, it takes me half an hour to answer a work email because, I look at the email and then I get a notification and then I get a phone call and all of a sudden I've been scrolling social media and I can't focus. And so what I've been doing is been writing the titles of the poems that I want to write. So I've flipped it completely so that I have this kind of list to go through when I'm feeling in a pace that I can write. So I go, I want to write a poem about, growing up as a scrappy kid. And regardless of how polished you are, you will always be that scrappy kid. So I wrote Scrappy Kid as a poem that I'm going to write. And I found that has taken the pressure off because I know that when I can pay attention again, hopefully, that I'll be able to come back to all these ideas.
That's huge. I think that idea of building an inventory to pull from is incredibly smart. I think we can all relate to the distractions of life and work when trying to create, and the email example is a a common one, I would say. So that's fantastic. Thank you, Eddie. I'm going to go ahead and ask you that same thing. How has your writing process skyrocketed or not skyrocketed during the pandemic?
Yeah. Oh, well, it's certainly evolved. I think at the beginning of the pandemic, I didn't have the emotional and mental and spiritual space
Yeah.
to focus on writing. I think along with the rest of the world, there is a pretty seismic shift in my priorities. We were all in survival mode, but now I think I've found my rhythm, and I think one of the positives that have come from this environment, and at least with regards to its impact on my creativity, is I have less distracting me. I've always been the kind of person with multiple projects on the go and always doing something. And I think, this era that we're in has really taught me how to slow down and just sit back and observe, which has really helped feed my creativity.
Wonderful. If I could recommend anything to any new writer out there, it is slow down. Take the time to really sit in the idea of a story, a poem, an essay. I think that's something that can feel like a privilege at time to have that sense of time. Thank you for sharing that, Eddie. I'm curious, and this is going to be for all of you again. I'm curious, and I'm going to start with you, Amanda. I wonder if you have any other projects in the pipeline. So, in addition to what you're working on now, do you have other ideas? Are there other things or books or stories that you want to write?
Yeah, so with Katerina, I want to work on my short story collection. But I am writing a novel currently as part of my MFA program. So I attend the Institute for American Indian Arts, doing my Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing. And I'm working with my mentors right now on writing a novel called The Berry Pickers. And it's a fictional account of the Mi'kmaq who travel to Maine in the summers and have for generations and generations to pick blueberries. So it is fiction, but it's based on a Mi'kmaq experience. So I'm about halfway through writing that novel. So I'm very, very excited about it.
Ooh, that sounds exciting. Incredible. Well, congrats. I can't wait to hear more about how that comes along. Carrie Ann, I'll ask you the same question. Do you have any other projects in the pipeline right now?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things I have on the go. So the first is something that I'm planning to work with Deborah on. It's a work of narrative nonfiction, a collective biography about some really incredible women who I'm going to argue helped shape an entire discipline of primatology. So that's my background. I'm a primatologist, which just means that I know how to study primates, our closest living relatives. And so with this project, I'm going to explore the lives of these women and the many incredible discoveries that they made, and ultimately how they shaped this discipline under the backdrop of my own experience working my way through primatology. And then I actually have another project as well in the pipe, which is a different genre. It's a work of young adult fiction that falls under the Madagascar theme, because I'm very passionate about Madagascar and lemurs. And so that is about a young girl whose father is on a scientific expedition in Madagascar and goes missing, and she takes it upon herself to find him, and obviously learns a lot about herself and Madagascar and lemurs and conservation along the way. So those are the few things I have in the pipe.
Ooh, incredible. Incredible. I feel like I should have more ideas on the go right now after hearing that. But that makes me think of something, and I'm going to flip things a little bit for you, Eddie. What do you think about having multiple projects on the go? Like, is that a pro or a con for you? Do you find that you can kind of have that ebb and flow, or you can roll back into another project when you're kind of sick of one or it's not coming along? You can kind of bounce back and forth. What do you think about that?
I know for myself, I benefit from having a bit of distance from the work. I've had projects, mainly novels, that require an intense amount of dedication and focus. And it's really easy to get lost in that world and in that work itself. And that can be a good thing, but it's not always a good thing. I think, I at least for myself benefit from having a bit of distance from it, so that when I revisit it, I'm looking at it with fresh eyes. So I think in that way, having multiple projects on the go can be really, really helpful. It's a good way to keep our creativity flowing and stimulated. Being able to draw from different influences and shift focus, shift gears across different projects, I think can be really, really very much a good thing. Otherwise, it's easy, I think, to get myopic with any one project.
I agree. I like having multiple things on the go as well. So that's fantastic. But also I have a short attention span, so can't really focus on one project for, any length of time. Rebecca, I would love to know if you have any other projects in the pipeline aside from, what we already know about. Share your ideas with us.
Yeah, I'm currently working on an outline and pitch for another kid's book. I sent a short story or an essay that I wrote to Anik, who does the kids' books that I have. And I really like the idea of writing a story that doesn't have any words, so that kids can kind of interpret the pictures themselves, and finding a really excellent illustrator for that. And it's all around my grandfather's chair. I didn't grow up always very safe, but my grandfather was a kind of life raft sometimes when I was growing up. And so he had this chair that my whole life took place in, right? Whether it was, fiddling with his wristwatch or doing crosswords with him. And then when he started to age and was getting sicker and older and I was getting bigger, the relationship around that chair changed from me sitting in his lap as a little kid to sitting leaned up against it, to me bringing him snacks when he was really unwell and at the end of his life. And so this whole kind of picture book around this notion of growing and loss told through experiences in this armchair.
Incredible. Beautiful. That sounds really fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Rebecca. So I've got some questions for each of you, some specific questions. I've read your work. I've connected to it deeply, and so I hope these questions are of interest to you. So I'm going to start with you, Rebecca. And here's my question for you about your poetry. Your poetry is blunt, honest, and excavating. As I read I Place You Into the Fire, I fell in love with your voice. And even more so when I reached the author's note, which to me read like a love letter to self. It's a book I will personally revisit often. How different is crafting poems for the stage versus for the page?
Thank you. It's funny because every single poem in that book, in I Place You in the Fire, it was performed on a stage before it was ever bound in a book. So if you read it, and if you've ever heard me perform poetry, a lot of people say that they hear me in their heads when they're reading the poetry, because I have a certain kind of style that I perform in that's a little bit different from maybe a spoken word poetry voice that a lot of folks have come to associate with speaking poetry out loud, but it's very much a style of my own. And for me, it's about a call to action when it comes to these kind of pieces of poetry, so much so that for me, it's about trying to get people so riled up or so uncomfortable in their privilege or so aghast at the injustices that can happen to Indigenous people and have happened, that they feel the need to do something. And so more often than not, I have an idea or a mission in mind to change something, and then I write a poem that suits that goal.
Incredible. Incredible. A mission, a call to action. I like that, and I sense that in your work. Thank you for that. Eddie, I'm very curious about how you build characters. And so do you think deeply about the relationships that your characters will have, or do you focus more on their quirks and their personalities?
Yeah, well, I love writing characters who are messy and complicated because people are messy and complicated. So I have a lot of fun with that. I always start with two things. So one, I always have to understand what a character wants. And two, I have to understand what a character is afraid of. I think much of human behavior boils down to desire and fear. So from that starting point, the rest is pretty easy. I actually don't really enjoy doing full character sketches of personality traits and quirks and everything else. I find once I understand the foundation of the character, what drives them and what scares them, the rest tends to take shape organically. Another thing that I really like to play with is how we decide what to reveal and conceal about ourselves. We all have inward and outward selves, and that tends to morph and change depending on who we're with and the environment we're in. And I think it can also often be a source of conflict within oneself and also within relationships. So, instead of trying to contrive a conflict between two characters, I often just, write the character and have them formed in my mind and let the story play out. And I often find that the conflicts arise organically through what each character decides to reveal and conceal about themselves. But I love writing characters. It's half the fun for me.
Exactly. It almost sounds like you're finding entry points into the characters and just kind of letting them do what they do, putting them in the room and just listening, seeing what happens, right? I love that. Thank you. Thank you. I have a question for you, Carrie Ann, about your book, Chasing Lemurs. What propelled you to not only write about them, but to study them? Can you tell us a little bit more about the process of writing this epic journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess it probably won't surprise you to know that what drives my research and what drives my passion for writing about lemurs kind of go hand in hand. For those who don't know what a lemur is, it's a type of primate found only on Madagascar. So this is the book here. So this here on the side is a lemur. And what a lot of people don't know is that lemurs have kind of the devastating distinction of being the most endangered group of animals on the planet. So when it comes to my research as well as my writing, it's really driven by this passion for conservation and preservation of this really incredible species that would be really sad if they were gone from the world. So that's what drives that. And in terms of the book, so Chasing Lemurs focuses on the very first trip that I took to Madagascar when I was just a young PhD student embarking on my field work. I had been tasked with setting up a new field site where I would return later to study the lemurs in the long term for more than a year. And that trip really didn't go as planned. Basically, anything that could go wrong did go wrong. It took us, more than 10 days to hike into this field site across some really treacherous terrain, foraging rivers along kind of sandbanks, and culminated in my having to coordinate an emergency rescue mission to bring my field assistant to safety because he had contracted malaria. And so, that was a pretty epic journey, obviously. And I was keeping journals and writing letters home, to tell people that I was okay and, we're getting out. But when I got home, I just found myself, I didn't have any interest in writing about it. I kind of put those journals on the shelf. I filed away those emails. And even though there were people in my life who were kind of encouraging me to write about that story, I just didn't feel at the time ready to do that. So I ended up actually going back to Madagascar to an easier site to access and spent more than a year studying the lemurs there and getting to know the people and understanding the real kind of complexities around the conservation problem. And so I think having that perspective was really necessary to be able to write this book, because what ended up coming out when I did sit down to finally write it was much more than just that adventure story. It's really, I think of it as a love letter to Madagascar, a beautiful country that really stuck with me and just compels me to go back again and again. And I don't think I could have done that, written that story that needed to be told without having all of that experience under my belt. So, yeah.
Amazing, amazing. I think that just sounds like an epic journey in itself, just this idea of coming into the decision to then write this book. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with us. Amanda, I read your story in Grain magazine and I fell into your poetic prose. I'm curious to know if other genres inform your fiction, and how does a story start for you?
I've heard other people say poetic prose, and it's funny because I'm so intimidated by poetry. I find it very overwhelming and beautiful, but I don't know if I could do it. So in terms of where my stories come from, I like to say it's magic. So I always hear a little kernel of truth, and then I just create some magic around it. So usually it's a conversation overheard on a subway, or I see something interesting on a walk and something just happens, or in that place between asleep and awake when you're just getting comfortable and you're just about to doze off. Those are some really good stories come there. So I have about 40, 50 notes on my phone. Sometimes when I wake up in the morning, they make sense. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they lead to story. Sometimes they don't. So yeah, I think it's magic, I would say.
I like that answer, magic. I'm always on the lookout for a little bit of that. So that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Amanda. So now, folks, we have some rapid fire questions, and these questions are for everyone. So we'll go around in a circle, and your answers are meant to be short. So try to keep it to 1 or 2 sentences max. I know that's tough, but you can do it. I have faith in all of you. So who is the most supportive person in your life when it comes to your writing? Eddie.
My husband, Thomas. I always say he is my biggest fan and my most honest critic.
Amazing. Carrie Ann, who is the most supportive person in your life when it comes to your writing?
I have to say my partner, Travis. He is always my best reader and very tolerant of my early morning hours, which is when I do my writing.
Amazing. And Amanda, same question for you. Who is the most supportive person to you and your writing?
Aside from my immediate family members, I would have to say my very good friend and mentor, Christiane Conlon, who is a writer here in the Annapolis Valley. She has supported me even when she's read the bad stuff. She always still found something good in it. So
Love that. Love that. And Rebecca, what about you? Who's the most supportive person in your life when it comes to your writing?
My spouse, he has encouraged me to try different kinds of writing. He buys me different styles of books and literature, anything from graphic novels. He bought me The Break because he said, I thought you could write a novel. You have the potential of this. Like he's just like, I want you to have all these ideas. And he's always buying me Indigenous authors and says like, I think you could do this. I think you could do this. You're so great. So definitely my spouse.
Amazing. Amazing. Set the bar high. I like that. I like that.
Yeah.
Next question. Yeah, exactly. Next question. Who is your first reader? I'll start with you again, Eddie.
Same answer. My husband. He's the only one I trust reading my stuff when it's not ready for anyone else's eyes. And I can always rely on him to give me the most honest feedback.
Awesome. Thanks, Eddie. And what about you, Carrie Ann? Who's your first reader?
I'm going to switch it up a bit and say my father, Ken. He has always been my first reader since I was a young girl, bringing him my stories, and he'd mark them up with a red pen. And still to this day, I send him my first drafts, and he's always got the best feedback.
Awesome. And Amanda, what about you? Who's your first reader?
my first reader is my cousin Tyler, and I imagine he gets very annoyed with me texting him and saying, check your email, please tell me what you think of this. He's the first person I go to when I'm looking for a word that I can't find. He's the person I send even chapters and bits to, so he reads everything first.
Amazing. And what about you, Rebecca? Who's your first reader?
It would be Andre Fenton. He is a fellow writer here in Halifax. He's an African Nova Scotian writer and like one of my poetry buddies. We've traveled across Canada numerous times performing together. So Andre Fenton, any ideas, any lines, any stanzas, go straight to him and get his opinion.
Very cool. Next rapid fire question. Who would you pick to illustrate your next book cover? Eddie, I see you've got a book cover behind you, so why not? I'm going to pass that to you.
Yeah, I do have to say kudos to Sophie Pass-Lang, who designed both my book covers, and I love her work. But if I were to pick someone, I would probably say Alex Gross. He's an artist that I really quite admire. I think he describes his work as pop surrealism, and he takes familiar iconography and does really unsettling things with it. And that just reflects my work so perfectly. So, yeah, there you go. So if you're watching, Alex.
Very cool.
Got a book.
There you go. You got to put it out into the universe. You got to manifest that. What about you, Carrie Ann? Who would you have illustrate your book cover?
Yeah, so there's a really wonderful wildlife illustrator named Rachel Hudson, who has some especially impressive renderings of lemurs. So I think I had to go with that one. We actually have a few of her prints up on our wall. So yeah, I would love that for a book cover.
Fantastic, fantastic. And what about you, Amanda? Who would you have to illustrate your book cover?
Yeah, I've actually thought about this, and there's a brilliant artist in my community of Glooscap First Nation. Her name's Dionne Lynch. And I have some of her work. She's a tattoo artist and a regular artist, and I probably would ask her because I love her stuff.
Very cool. Awesome. And what about you, Rebecca? Who would you pick to illustrate your next book cover?
Ooh, it's always a tie. Jordan Bennett is a Mi'kmaq artist. He won the Nova Scotia Masterworks last year. He has had incredible installments, and he does a lot of really cool modern geometric designs incorporating Indigenous symbols. And then the other one would be my sister, Lauren Thomas. She is a fantastic artist. And so I've approached her a couple of times and she's shy, but she's excellent artist as well.
Awesome. Amazing. Well, thank you all for that rapid round. I think we should move to some audience questions. I know we're getting some things coming in, so I'm going to go ahead and get my audience question tool out. So the first question, this is an interesting one. And you know what? I think I'm going to go with you, Eddie, for this one. Writing is full of good days and bad days. What gets you through the bad ones? And can books of writers you love help with this? I love this question.
Yeah. So what gets me through the bad days? I would say sometimes when it's a bad day of writing, the last thing that I want to do is to write. And it's a good excuse for me to step away from my own work and refill the inspiration well through the work of others. So what I tend to do is I'll take a break and I'll read something beautiful, some poetry, some short fiction, some nonfiction even, or I'll dive into whatever novel I'm reading at the time. And that tends to fire me up again for the next round of writing, which is hopefully a good day. And good days always start with coffee. I find coffee just goes hand in hand with a good writing day. So that's a tried and true technique for me.
I love that. That's a good tip. And I'm writing that down. I'm writing down refill the inspiration well, because I think we all need to hear that. We need to think about that. And it kind of ties into what you mentioned before, Rebecca, about building up this inventory so that you have something to pull from. So maybe I'll pose this question to you as well. Writing is full of good days and bad days. What gets you through the bad ones?
I think a break. I think rest is fine. A poet who I really look up to, Elle Jones, she once said, like, do I get to call myself a poet if I'm not constantly writing poetry? And I think the answer is yes, right? That if you have a moment where you're not feeling productive, I don't see why you would want to make yourself feel worse by like staring at a blank screen on your computer or a blank piece of paper in your notebook. So I think rest and stepping away is probably some of the best things you can do.
I agree. We all need to allow ourselves permission to rest and step away from the writing when the writing tells us to do that. So I agree. Thank you for sharing that. And what about you, Amanda? Good days and bad days. How do you power through?
I believe in the same thing that's already been mentioned. If I'm having a bad day, I just shut the computer and I like to go for a walk or watch some mindless TV or find inspiration. So there's so many brilliant writers. So I'll just go and pick up, and I don't read the whole thing. I'll just like open the first chapter of a Jane Urquhart novel or a Kelly Jo Ford's new novel, something that I found inspiration in, and hopefully it clicks. If it doesn't, I just put it aside and wait for another day.
Exactly. I like that too. And that kind of leads me into another question around surprising spaces where we find inspiration. I might find myself watching Netflix and it's a word or a phrase or the way someone says something, I want to jot it down. So I'm curious, have you ever found inspiration in a really surprising way or place? And I'll start with you, Carrie-Anne.
Yeah, so that's a tough one because I tend to find inspiration, all around me, especially when I'm outside and out in nature. I find that to be very inspiring and refilling as well. But I think, often I'll find it, in the places where I least expect it when I'm kind of working on, for example, like an onerous grant application for the nonprofit that I work on called Planet Madagascar. Which, can be really aggravating, and, you never know if you're going to get that funding, but it takes so much work. But still kind of being reminded again, I think, of why I do what I do and why I write about what I write about, even in those kind of challenging tasks.
Yes. And what about you, Amanda? Finding inspiration. I know you spoke before about magic and this idea of things just kind of appearing. So I'm very curious to hear a little bit more about how you find inspiration in surprising places or ways.
I find inspiration in the mundane, like when there's nothing happening, when I'm like unloading the laundry, all of a sudden something will come to me. Or like I said, I'm a people watcher, so I like to sit at a patio restaurant and watch people, and just the way somebody will move or something they'll say just sparks something, and then all of a sudden I have this story. And lately, dreams. I've been writing my dreams into microfiction, so that's a bit of an interesting situation.
Cool. Yes, I like that. That is so cool. And there's just so much material in our dreams, right? So much material. And I think if you wake up with this visceral memory or this feeling from the dream, pay attention to that, because as the day goes, it will dissipate, it will disappear, it will go away. So super interesting. I think we should all pay more attention to our dreams. I have another question, and this might be a toughie, but I'm curious, now that we're in this virtual world, do we have this idea of a dream virtual event? Like, we're doing this event online. What would make it incredible? What would make it amazing? I'll start with you, Eddie.
I think this is my dream virtual event. We're doing it right
hey,
now. We're living the dream. You know what, I think the one positive that has really come through with the pandemic, for me at least, is our ability now to end openness to connecting virtually with people all over the world. So I think any event in which writers and readers and whomever are able to connect from their own corners of the world and give us all insight into their daily lives, so that we can see the differences, but also the similarities, and that shared collective experience would be my dream virtual event. And I've taken part in a lot of events in which that has been true. So that's certainly a bright spot for me from the pandemic.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. And what about you, Rebecca? Do you have any dreams of the big dream virtual event?
It's a cheeky answer, but my favorite virtual event is a not virtual event. I think that they're really important, because I think they're really accessible sometimes for folks who may not be able to access a venue or something like that. So I think they come with a lot of really important questions when we think about what life is going to be like. Should we, get through this pandemic? And I think that it should be a hybrid, at least. So I think my ideal would be a hybrid, assuming that we can have accessible performances for everyone, right? I thrive in a spotlight. I have a lot of brothers and sisters. Getting undivided attention was extremely rare. So for me, you put me in a spotlight and I am like the plant that has tasted sunlight for the first time. But at the same time, I recognize that not everybody can get to a venue for mobility reasons, for financial reasons, family or safety commitments, all sorts of things. So I think my dream virtual event is one that is both virtual and in real life.
I love that. One foot in both worlds. I think that's beautiful. And what a fantastic note to end this wonderful discussion on. Thank you all so much. That concludes the 2021 Writers Trust Rising Stars live stream. We encourage you to keep the conversation going using the hashtag WTRisingStars. Thank you once again to everyone who joined us live, to those of you who are watching the recording on your own time, and to our wonderful sponsors. I hope you are as excited as I am about discovering these new amazing writers. Keep an eye out for their upcoming work and visit writerstrust.com/risingstars for more info. Have a great day, everyone.